most of the time, whenever we start new ventures or we try to go in a new direction in our lives, we do so with the best of intentions. I don't think any one of us has ever started something new in our lives thinking, well, this is probably going to blow up in my face. No, we tend to make changes in our lives thinking that they're going to be for the better, that they're going to make our lives improved, that they're going to help our situation out in one way or another. We start the new diet thinking about all of the weight that we're going to lose on this one. Never mind the fact that the last 6 didn't work. We invest in a new stock or a new company thinking that this is going to take off, that it's going to put our family into a much better financial state than what we were to start off with. Or we try out the new fast food chicken place thinking that it's going to be different than all the other fast food chicken places, even though they're all the same. Still, I'm excited for the Chick-fil-A in Ontario, if I'm honest with you. My body craves the spicy chicken. Anyway. But a lot of things throughout history have always been started with one set of intentions, one element that it was going to go towards. But oftentimes the end result of that is not the way that things were meant to go during it. That's not necessarily always a bad thing. It kind of maybe has those negative connotations for us. But just because something starts off intended for one purpose doesn't mean that the final result lives up to that purpose. Take for instance, the Slinky. Yes, the children's toy that you probably played with as a child yourself, that your kids, your grandkids, and maybe for some of you, your great-grandkids have played with since then. The Slinky was not originally intended to be a toy. In fact, the original intention of the Slinky was to be an element of protection for some sensitive equipment that would be found on U.S. naval vessels. The idea was that this spring-looking thing would sit on top of it, and so if something bumped into it, like if you faced turbulence or, heaven forbid, a bomb go off near the boat, the Slinky itself would be the thing that would absorb the impact, keeping that instrumentation safe. But one day, as the inventor of the Slinky happened to bump one of the shelves that all of the Slinkies rested on, he watched in amazement as they all fell into that perfect Slinky rhythm. And suddenly he knew, I think I can make more money if I did this. So therefore, generations have been bemused because one guy bumped a shelf. So there you go. But there are some things that historically speaking, maybe started off with good intentions and maybe even worked for a while, but for one reason or another, things changed and adapted and it affected the end result of it. And a lot of that is starting to make the news right now. It may be naive of me to think, but I tend to believe that most government programs, most things that our leaders and officials come out with, they're started with the best of intentions. They maybe just don't end that way. When Social Security was first begun as a concept, it was done so with the idea to provide every American an opportunity to eventually retire from their work, to be able to step away from it. Before Social Security, there were scores of people who would have to work until the day they died because they had no other means of taking care of themselves. So when FDR rolled out Social Security, it was done with the idea of once they hit a certain age, people can retire. But when it came out, FDR never could have foreseen things like people living significantly longer than what was the average lifespan at the time, and therefore drawing on that Social Security for far longer. He couldn't have foreseen the idea that members of the population would choose to go childless and therefore lower the ranks of the working class. These were done with the best of intentions, but it didn't necessarily work out well in the long haul, and now we're trying to scramble to figure out how do we fix this. We may have had good intentions, but the end result was a little bit rough. I mean, my goodness, the internet itself was started with the absolute best of intentions. The idea behind the internet was a way for people all around the world to share information, to help us better communicate with people all around the globe, and to unite us as people. At no point in time when they invented the internet could they have ever foreseen an invention known as social media that would then lead to the spread of misinformation, dangerous elements in and of itself, and online bullying that would cause all sorts of other issues. No one planned on that ever happening. It just sort of became part of the end result. The reality is that intentionality is is 1 thing. It's really the end result, though, that matters. Whether your intention is whatever it is that you do, or whatever your intentions are, ultimately it's the end result that is going to matter. The fact of the matter is that no matter how well thought out you might think your idea or your direction in your life is, something might come along and alter the way that things are done. It could be a good thing, like, again, you bump a shelf and it leads to millions of dollars that you never thought you were going to get. Or it could be as bad as a Harvard student with a computer and far too much free time on his hands. We might start with good intentions, but once the final results are in, the only thing that is going to matter is that end result. We tend to have the best of intentions when it comes to our faith as well. As Christians, oftentimes we will start off with the intention of serving more, or maybe starting a brand new Bible study that we've never done before, or maybe seeking out an answer to a question that we've always had but just never really found a good answer towards. And so we kind of have this intention of growing in our faith, but things happen, don't they? Again, we might start off with that idea of spending that time in a Bible study, but things get in the way. Life happens, and all of a sudden we realize that it's the end of the day and we haven't had a moment to crack open our Bibles for ourselves. Maybe we thought, I'm going to get more intentional in my prayer life and I'm going to set aside this specific time for prayer, but then the TV show you're watching is really captivating. Or maybe you're doom scrolling a little too long on your phone, going through that social media invention, and then the time passes. Or maybe those of us who are parents, we intend to start a family devotional time. We're going to set aside a certain day at a certain time that every week our family is going to get together and do devotions. But then all of a sudden the calendar explodes on us. The kid gets involved in a new sport or a new activity, and we have got a new thing going on at work, and our spouse has got something else that's going on, and before we know it, we don't have that time anymore. We meant to have this time. We had the intentions of making this a priority in our lives, but the end result doesn't match that. I think, genuinely speaking, that Joshua and his generation can probably relate to some of that. Some of the idea of having the best of intentions, but that end result not quite matching up. Now, you might be somewhat confused why we're starting a series on the book of Judges, and we're talking about Joshua. That may seem kind of weird to you, but I want to remind you of something that's really, really important. It's something that we talked about way back in January, but really it's something that we need to keep in mind as we continue to go through the Old Testament throughout this year, and that is that the Old Testament itself is really just one large story. It's all telling one complete story, but it's going in different ways about it. And so while there may be different books like Joshua and Judges, they are still telling ultimately the same story. And in fact, those two books are considered what are called historical books. They are like the accounting of the rise of the nation of Israel as well as its early history. So as we continue on, yes, Judges is going to be a different book than Joshua entirely. And I know we didn't spend a whole lot of time in Joshua. Sorry, Joel. But hey, we're going to continue on through there. So I challenge you to read through Joshua so you know all of it. But Joshua's generation is a unique generation, I think, in the history of early Israel. They're the kids of the people who were the first ones supposed to go to the promised land, but they got scared. And so God said it's not going to be until that generation passes away that the next generation is going to go do it. And we kind of pick things up from last week after they get to see God move in an incredible way, in a way that only their parents had ever really seen beforehand. And they kind of go on from there, and they go like a house on fire, taking over different places in different areas. And they're able to do so in tremendously different ways. And I want to remind you that this is a group of people that before this, they were slaves. So they had no military training whatsoever. They were completely dependent on God. And seemingly they knew exactly why they were winning all these battles and why they were taking over all these things, because most of the time when we finish reading about a battle, we see a verse that's similar to Joshua chapter 10, verse 42, which says, "And Joshua captured all these kings and their land at one time because the Lord God of Israel fought for Israel." They knew exactly why they were able to take over these places and why they were able to fight these people. And much like the generation before them, they got to see God do big and demonstrative and incredible and miraculous things that you and I would probably salivate at the idea of seeing just one, and they got to see a lot of them. As we go through the book of Joshua, the one that probably stands out most to us is Jericho. So there you go, Joel. There's your one and only mention. So, I mean, it would be kind of cool, right, to just spend a few days walking around a place and then just start yelling and people blowing trumpets and then the walls fall down. Like, that's going to stand out in your mind, I imagine. But more than that, they got to take on people who were much bigger, much stronger, much better trained than any of them, and they were able to take them down with relative ease because of what God was doing through these people. They knew that because of what God did for them, that they were able to take over these places that otherwise they had no business being able to take over. I mean, God in one instance, Scripture tells us that he stops the sun's progression, which means, if you know anything about science, that means that he had to halt the rotation of the earth just to give the Israelites more time to end more people and get through this battle easier. And in fact, actually, there's a really interesting article, and it's modern astrologists actually went backtracking through history, and there's about a 24-hour window they can't account for that might actually account for the sun stopping in the sky. We don't know that for a fact, but I think it's kind of cool. They got to see God do all sorts of different things, and really everything in Joshua culminates with the final chapter as Joshua is addressing the entire nation as they are standing all together in the land that had been promised to their people for more than 500 years. They are the ones getting to see the fulfillment of that promise right in front of them. And when Joshua addresses the people, he gives them a choice, because he tells them that all of this is because of God's intervention in our lives, but now you have a choice to make. And he says in Joshua chapter 24, verses 14 and 15, one of the most infamous parts of the Bible itself, "Now therefore fear the Lord and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." I thought really hard about taking an informal survey and ask who has this verse on display in your house, but I'm guessing it's most of you. So Hobby Lobby's made a lot of money off that verse. But the people actually respond to Joshua in the midst of this. And that's kind of a weird thing if you really stop to think about it, right? Like, did they send a representative? Was everybody in the nation saying the exact same thing at the exact same time to Joshua? Because I imagine as somebody who speaks in front of a large group of people, that'd be weird. If all of you responded in unison to me, please don't do that. But they respond to him and what his challenge is. And they say in verses 16 through 18, "Then the people answered, 'Far be it from us that we should forsake the Lord to serve other gods. For it is the Lord our God who brought us and our families up from the land of Egypt out of the house of slavery, and who did these great signs in our sight and preserved us, in all the ways that we went, and among all the people whom through we passed. And the Lord drove out before us all the people, the Amorites, who lived in the land. Therefore, we also will serve the Lord, for he is our God.'" My goodness, you can feel how close this entire nation feels to God, right? We can't even begin to fathom what that looks like, to see an entire nation proclaim that we are going to devote ourselves to the God who has rescued us. I can't imagine that there's not a single arm in that entire crowd that doesn't have goosebumps by the end of it. Because this is such a moving moment as they are standing here in the midst of starting off this brand new nation, and they are saying, we are going to serve God. We're going to make sure that he is the focus of our nation. We are going to live in harmony with him forever. Right? Well, here's the thing. The intention was certainly there. The intention was there that we are going to be a nation that serves with God. Again, remember, this is supposed to be a theocracy, meaning that God is supposed to be the figurehead, the ruler of this entire nation. And at least for this first generation, it seems like that is going to work perfectly for them. The intention is there, but see, there's a little thing that Joshua says just a few verses later, and it kind of stands out like a sore thumb. It sounds a little bit more like the rah-rah, we're going to serve God, but I want you to really listen, especially to what Joshua has to say in verses 23 and 24. He said, he being Joshua, "Then put away the foreign gods that are among you, and incline your heart to the Lord, the God of Israel." The people said to Joshua, "The Lord is our God, and we will serve him, and his voice we will obey." Did you catch it? And this actually harkens back to something that Joshua had said earlier in that first verse of his that we said. He said, "Put away the gods that are amongst you." He didn't say, "Then boy, aren't you all glad that we got rid of all those false gods and those idols?" He didn't say, "Great, let's start the fire of all the idols that we've collected." He said, "Put them away." What's the implication there? That they've got them. That they are in their homes, that they are on their persons, that they are with them right now. And with all due respect to Joshua, just putting them away isn't going to solve the long-term problem. We got to destroy these things. So we already know they're having a really hard time with that level of obedience. We know that way back in Exodus that God had even told them, hey, I don't like idols. I don't like false gods. Get rid of them. I'm a jealous God. And they're already struggling with that level of obedience. Uh-oh. But another issue that's brought up is actually brought up in the first chapter of the book of Judges. See, again, while the whole thing with Joshua and the people and God, it feels good in that moment, and such a great ending to the book of Joshua itself, as amazing as that is, that the people are proclaiming, we're going to follow after God, that's never the end of the story, is it? Right? Like, I mean, if it was Hollywood, that's where the end credits are. We're going to roll through all of it. We're going to find out who was the key gripper and all that great stuff, because what a great ending that we have. And then it's going to have a little line that says Joshua returned and Avengers Doomsday. Some of you understood that joke, so you're welcome. The rest of you are like, what? That's okay. But it's a perfect ending to have this great moment of this culmination between the relationship of God and this early Israelites, but we have to turn the page. And in Judges chapter 1, we're told something really significant. You might start to see a pattern. We see it in 27 through 36. We're not going to read the whole thing, but you begin to see a pattern in that particular passage. In verse 28, it says, when Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not drive them out completely. If you keep reading about the specific tribes of Israel taking over the land, it reads more of the same. They conquer, but they don't drive out. And the problem with that is that this entire generation heard Moses say in Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 2, and when the Lord your God has given them over to you and you defeat them, then you must devote them to complete destruction. You shall make no covenant with them and show no mercy to them. But the Israelites showed a lot of mercy by not driving them out of the land completely, by not getting rid of this element that's there. That means that these people are still alive, and that means that they're still going to practice their foreign religions, their pagan religions. And that also means that they may have some influence for the Israelites to do the same. They were told, get rid of them entirely, but they didn't do that. And while, yes, none of that is great, there's a further element that does not exactly cast Joshua's generation in the best light possible. In fact, I consider it to be a pretty damning indictment of an entire generation. Out of everything that we have discussed thus far, I find Judges chapter 2, verse 10 to be the most disappointing verse that we have covered so far. It says, "And all that generation," meaning Joshua's generation, "were gathered to their fathers, and there arose another generation after them who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel." An entire generation. The generation that followed Joshua, the first full generation in the promised land. And they have no idea how they got there. They have no clue as to what God did to provide these people with the land that they are currently dwelling in. They have no idea what it took for God to be able to make this sort of thing happen. And the only reason they don't know that is because they were never told. That means that Joshua's generation failed to share with them their faith, to share with them the stories of what God did in the land, to simply share God with them, period. The same generation who just 2 chapters before this are all saying how great things are with God and how they're going to serve him with everything they've got with them, and they don't even make it a full generation before they drop the ball. And this is the same generation who again heard Moses say in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 and 7, "And these words that I command you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk of them when you sit in your house and when you walk by the way and when you lie down and when you rise." They heard that. They had all of those moments. All of these incredible things that God does in front of them, bringing the walls of Jericho down, stopping the sun from continuing to go on. They saw all of this and they told their kids none of it. Wow. They had the intention of, we're going to follow after God. The end result said something entirely different. And the reality is that end result is something that we're going to be dissecting as we go through the entire book of Judges. Many of you have heard me say, and we're going to continue to talk about it even next week, I consider the book of Judges to be the most depressing book in all of the Bible. That includes a Bible that includes a book called Lamentations. And if you don't know what lamenting is, it means to mourn. It's a book of Jeremiah whining. And I would still tell you that Judges is more depressing. And I think that by the time we get to the end of this series, you're going to find it pretty depressing as well. I wish we could spend more time in Joshua. I do, but I mean, it's already July. We're more than halfway through the year, and there's still a lot more of the Old Testament I want to get covered. But I don't understand how this entire generation that sees all this stuff that God does utterly fails. And they failed because they didn't get rid of the idols when they were told to do so. It failed because they were told to drive out the people, but they didn't. And it fails because they were told to tell your kids, but they didn't. Church, we have to be intentional about reaching the generations that follow behind us, about sharing our faith with them, about telling them our own stories of God and what He has done in our lives. And please understand, I'm not just talking to parents here. Yes, absolutely, parents, it should be important to us as parents that we share our faith with our kids, absolutely. But church, as a whole, each and every one of us should be seeking to pour into the lives of our students and our children that come to this church with us, to share with them some of the experiences that we've had, to tell them about some of the ways that God has moved in our lives. It's important as the church as a whole that we offer guidance when they need it, that we share with them our experiences with God, because it has tremendous impact whether or not they're a blood relative to us. Whether or not they're your own child or your own grandchild or your own great-grandchild. It still should be important to you to pour into as many kids as you possibly can. In fact, according to statistics, a student who has at least one adult mentor in their faith, outside of their biological family, if they have one person who is pouring into them, sharing their faith with them, whether or not they're their own child, that student is 3 times more likely to stay connected in their faith after high school, whether or not they stay home. Just one adult pouring into them who is not mom, who is not dad, who is not grandma, who is not grandpa, and that child is 3 times more likely to stay connected. And I have no idea what the statistics are if more than one person is pouring into that child, but just the nerd in me has to think that it grows exponentially. The impact is gigantic when the church at large seeks to help its young people in their faith. When we as a church body continue to pour into the students, and yes, I will admit I may be a little biased here because I did spend 14 years of my life in youth ministry. I know the value of it. I have seen as kids have that, I call it the light switch moment, where it goes from being mom and dad's faith to being my faith. I lived for that moment. I still do. Because it is such an amazing and incredible moment. But I know that that moment doesn't just happen because mom and dad took them to church. It happens because other people who are outside of their family care enough about those kids to pour into them. And more than that, the youth of this church, they need your experience, they need your stories, and yes, they need to know your struggles in your faith. Brad could tell you this, because I have told him on more than one occasion as an older minister to a younger minister, I'm going to tell you all my mistakes because I want you to go out and make brand new mistakes. And I've shared some really embarrassing stories with him, haven't I, Brad? Anyway, but here's the thing. You have walked down paths in faith, been down roads over and over again that many of these kids are experiencing for the very first time. You know the way, frontwards, backwards, forwards. You could take that road blindfolded if you needed to. These kids have no idea where this road goes. And so they need the experience that you have. And in fact, the Apostle Paul understood the value of pouring into the next generation as he wrote in Titus chapter 2, verses 1 through 8. But as for you, teach what accords with sound doctrine. Older men are to be sober-minded, dignified, self-controlled, sound in faith, in love, and in steadfastness. Older women likewise are to be reverent in behavior, not slanderers or slaves to much wine. They are to teach what is good, and so train young women to love their husbands and children, to be self-controlled, pure, working at home, kind, and submissive to their own husbands, that the word of God may not be reviled. Likewise, urge the younger men to be self-controlled. Show yourself in all respects to be a model of good works, and in your teaching show integrity, dignity, and sound speech that cannot be condemned, so that the opponent may be put to shame, having nothing evil to say about us. If we want to sum up that entire 8 verses right there, it is take what you know and teach it to those who are younger than you. Pour into them. Just being an example for them to follow can be a huge impact on the lives of a student. And it never is as difficult as what it sounds like. Because what it sounds like right now is like, I'm telling all of you, you got to spend hour upon hour with these people. Sometimes it's just a matter of showing up to a basketball game. Sometimes it's just a matter of saying, hey man, I'm going to go fishing this weekend. You want to come with me? Sometimes it's just making a little bit of time available in your schedule to go and pour into that kid, to show them that you love them. Sometimes it's as simple as saying, hey, you want to take a walk with me? And that can have tremendous impact on the lives of those people as you get a chance to share your knowledge and your experience. You've heard me say before, I promise you're going to hear me say again, that knowledge that is not shared is knowledge that is wasted. But I'll also tell you this, that a church that is not actively pouring into its youth is a church that is actively dying. In the last 7 years, we have seen a whole host of churches close their doors. And while I don't know every reason why those churches have closed their doors, I can tell you probably from experience, one of the underlying reasons, they didn't invest in their youth. They saw their kids as more of a nuisance to be overcome than it is an investment to be grown. Church, if we want to see ourselves continue to grow as a church, it's going to happen because we pour into the lives of the youth that are around us. We don't treat them like they're second-class citizens, but instead we love them, we nurture them, we make time for them. Yeah, the thing of it is my parents taking me to church is probably a good reason as to why I'm here, but I can tell you a much bigger reason is because people like Jim Waterman poured into me. Because people who saw something in this absolute punk of a kid who was notorious for doing stupid things, they saw something in me that was worth investing their time. And so they poured into me. And I am tremendously grateful for each and every one of them, the ones that I can look back and say, yeah, absolutely, they did that, and the ones that I can probably say I missed at the time. I've had the opportunity to actually sit down with some of them and tell them face to face, thank you for what you've done for me. And I've been on the receiving end of that too, of having a student who was in my youth group tell me, thank you for pouring into me. Man, is it cool. I'm going to guess that for most of you in this room, no matter what your age is right now, that probably a good reason as to why you're still sitting in this room is because somebody along the way saw something in you that was worth pouring into. Don't let the chain stop at you. You've heard me say before that as long as you are still breathing, as long as you still have a pulse, that God has a purpose for you. Regardless as to what your physical capabilities are, I can tell you that one of those purposes is to share what you know with those who don't yet. Church, if we start valuing our students and start pouring into them, then we get a chance to do something that's so stinking cool, and that's sit back and watch them grow. I grew up in a family of farmers, and it always amazed me every year whenever my dad would plant beans and corn, not knowing what was going to happen after the fact. Sure enough, man, every single year you start to see those things bud up. And then one day you just blink, and all of a sudden the corn is blocking your vision when you're trying to make a left-hand turn. If you are involved in planting those seeds into our youth, then you get to sit back and watch and be amazed at how much God can grow in that student's life. But it doesn't happen if you don't make the time for it. So yeah, church, we can have the best of intentions, but we have to take the next step, and it's the harder step because it's the step that actually involves us doing it. We cannot afford for a generation to grow up without it, even if that's not what we intended. Psalms chapter 78 verse 4 says this, and we'll close with it. We will not hide them from our children, but we will tell to the coming generation the glorious deeds of the Lord and his might and the wonders that he has done.